"We only need you because of the money," Susan said. Then my brother, Mark, laughed and said, "He's an ATM machine, haha." I laughed too and said, "I stopped paying their mortgage." The next day, "We just want you for the money," my mother, Susan, said, laughing. Mark leaned back in his chair and grinned. "Yeah, he's an ATM machine, haha." I laughed too. It wasn't real, but they didn't notice. They never did. "Well, I guess I'll finish paying the mortgage," I said. And just like that, the conversation moved on. No thank you, no hesitation, just an expectation that I would continue to pay their bills as I always had. The next morning, I made the payment. I hardly thought about it. It was routine, like pumping gas or paying for groceries, except it wasn't even routine for me. I had been living with my parents since my divorce, which they said was the most pathetic thing that had ever happened to them. My wife, Laura, had left me for my boss. I don't even know how long it had been going on before I found out. It didn't really matter. She moved in with him almost immediately, and I was left with nothing, no house, no savings, just a half-empty apartment that I couldn't even stand to be in anymore. So I came here, back home, and that's when it really started. At first, I thought they were going to help me, give me a place to stay, try to get me back on my feet. But it didn't take long to realize that, in their eyes, I wasn't a son, I was a walking wallet. It wasn't just the mortgage. It was everything, their car payments, their credit card debt. Even Mark, who still lived at home even though he had a decent job, started borrowing money that he never paid back. And I let it happen because I didn't know how to say no. The worst thing was that they knew. One night, when they thought I was asleep, I heard them talking in the kitchen. Susan sighed. "I just don't know how much longer he's going to keep this up. What would he do?" My father, Robert, scoffed. "He never says no to us." "He's still sending money to that woman," Susan added. "If he's stupid enough to pay for her after she ran off with his boss, he's stupid enough to keep paying for us." They laughed like it was funny, like I was funny. My stomach turned, but I just stood there in the hallway, frozen. They weren't grateful. They weren't even indifferent. They expected it. They had no respect for me. And for the first time, I began to wonder what would happen if I finally said no. After that night, I felt like I had been punched in the gut. He never says no to us. He's stupid enough to keep paying. At least we don't have to worry about money. I had spent my whole life trying to be the good son, the reliable brother, the guy who wouldn't let his family struggle. And for what? So they could sit around and laugh at how easy it was to take advantage of me? I barely slept. I kept telling myself that I would say something, that I would finally tell them that I wasn't their personal ATM. But when morning came, I did what I always did. I got up, I went to the kitchen, and I let it happen again. Robert was at the table, flipping through the paper. Susan was pouring coffee, humming like she didn't care. Mark was on the couch, scrolling through his phone. He didn't even look up. "James, the water bill is due. You'll take care of it, right?" I hesitated for a second. I considered saying no. I thought about telling them that I don't pay for anything anymore. But then I nodded, yes, because that's what I always did. And just like that, life went on. For the next few weeks, I really paid attention. I started to notice the little things, how Mark, even though he had a full-time job, never seemed to contribute to anything. He always had money for video games, for takeout, for new sneakers, but when it came time to pay the bills, he suddenly had nothing. I noticed that my parents never asked for money. They just talked about what they needed because they knew I'd offer. Like the time Susan sighed dramatically and said, "The car payment is due tomorrow. I guess we'll figure something out." And like clockwork, I pulled out my phone and paid it. Or when Robert muttered, "The mortgage is creeping up again. If only we had a little more wiggle room." So I made another payment. They never had to ask because they knew I would take care of it. And then there were the conversations I wasn't supposed to hear. One night, Mark was talking to one of his friends on the phone. "Yeah, James is still here, man. It's pathetic. He's literally financing everything, the house, the bills, even my parents' credit cards. He's like a human piggy bank. He laughed. Yeah, well, at least we don't have to worry about anything. Another time, I found Susan talking to a neighbor on the porch. Oh, James? He still lives here. We're helping him, of course, but you know how he is always too soft. I mean, the man is still sending money to his ex-wife after she ran off with his boss. He's lucky we're looking out for him. It almost made me sick. They weren't just using me, they were mocking me for it. And yet, I didn't say anything. I told myself I would, but I didn't. Until Thanksgiving. That was the night I finally snapped. Thanksgiving was always a big deal in my family. Susan would go all out, turkey, stuffing, mashed potatoes, the works. Robert would drink too much, Mark would crack jokes, and my cousins would show up to eat without contributing anything. I knew how the night was going to go before it even started. I also knew it would be the last one. I didn't say anything, didn't give any hints, but as I sat at the table, listening to everyone talk and laugh like nothing was wrong, I felt something different this time. I wasn't part of that family, not really. I was just their financial safety net. And I was done pretending otherwise. Dinner started out normal enough. Susan was carving the turkey, Robert was talking about some old football game like it happened yesterday, and Mark was scrolling through his phone between bites. Then, as expected, the conversation turned to me. So, James, Robert said, reaching for the gravy, how does it feel to be the only divorced guy at the table? Mark snorted. Yeah, man, you've got to stop paying for that woman. She left you for your boss, bro. She's probably using your money to buy him gifts. He laughed like it was the funniest thing in the world. Susan chimed in without even looking up. Speaking of money, the mortgage is due next week. You've got that covered, right? I put down my fork. Something inside me snapped. For the first time in my life, I allowed myself to be angry. I leaned back in my chair and looked around the table. You guys are unbelievable. The room fell silent. Robert raised an eyebrow. Excuse me? I laughed, a real, deep laugh that made my stomach hurt. No, seriously, you sit here stuffing your faces with food that I paid for, in a house that I keep afloat, and the only thing you have to say to me is how pathetic I am. You know what's funny? The fact that you actually think you're better than me. Mark laughed and shook his head. Dude, relax. It's just a joke. I turned to him. Oh yeah? Like that joke you made to your friend about how I'm a human piggy bank? Or the one Mom made to the neighbor about how lucky I am to have you guys looking out for me? Susan's face paled. James, that's not... No, let's be honest, Mom, I cut her off. You don't care about me. You care about what I can do for you. And guess what? I finally get it now. Robert scoffed and leaned back in his chair. So what? Yeah, we only need you for your money. So what? Mark grinned from across the table. We love you because you have a good ATM and no withdrawal fees. My parents laughed. Mark laughed, and I laughed too louder than anyone. I laughed so hard my stomach hurt. So hard that my cousins, who had been watching in awkward silence, shifted in their seats, clearly uncomfortable. Then, my cousin Ethan, the only one who had never asked me for money, finally spoke up. You guys are screwed. But I stopped him with a hand. No, Ethan, it's fine. This is hilarious. I wiped my eyes, still grinning. You know what else is funny? The fact that I've decided I'm done paying for all of you. The laughter stopped. I leaned forward, my voice easy and casual. Yeah, the mortgage? That's on you now. The bills? Have fun. My bank is officially closed. Mark chuckled nervously. Yeah, okay, but no, I'm serious. I pushed back my chair and stood up. I'm done. Susan blinked. James, you can't just... I can, and I just did. For the first time, they looked nervous, and I loved it. But I wasn't done yet. Silence. For the first time in my life, my family didn't know what to say. I let it sink in, watching their expressions change from shock to confusion to something else, panic. Robert forced a laugh. All right, James, you made your little speech. You're done paying? Fine. But let's face it, you're not going anywhere. Susan nodded quickly. Exactly. You live here, remember? Where are you going? Mark grinned. Yeah, man. You always say things. But we all know you'll make the mortgage payment next week like you always do. I just smiled and picked up my plate. Then, very calmly, I walked over to the trash can and dumped my entire Thanksgiving dinner in it. Susan gasped as if I had just committed a crime. What are you doing? I turned around. Well, since I paid for this food, I figured I could do whatever I wanted with it. The room went silent. Then I walked past them to my room. What are you? Robert started, but I ignored him. I grabbed a duffel bag from my closet and started packing clothes, laptop, everything that mattered. I had nothing in this house worth keeping, no memories I wanted, no reason to stay. As I zipped up the bag, Mark leaned against the doorframe with his arms crossed. Dude, you're not leaving. I slung the bag over my shoulder and locked eyes with him. Watch me. Then I walked out. When I walked back into the living room, my parents were still sitting there, stunned. I threw my house keys on the table. I canceled every automatic payment mortgage, utilities, everything. You are on your own now. Susan stood up so fast her chair squeaked. James, you can't just leave, Robert scoffed. Do you really think you'll survive without us? I laughed. That's the funniest thing you've ever said. Then I turned to the one person who had actually stood up for me. Ethan, do you have a couch I can crash on for a week? Ethan grinned. Hell yeah. I patted his shoulder. Cool. Let's go. And just like that, I was out the front door. Susan screamed my name. Robert called me an ungrateful piece of trash. Mark, he just stood there, frozen. They didn't think I'd actually do it, but I did. And for the first time in my life, I felt free. What I didn't know was that leaving would set off a chain of events that would completely destroy their life. The first few days away from them felt incredible. I crashed at Ethan's place, a small but clean apartment across town. No one asked me for money. No one made fun of me. For the first time in years, I could just sit in silence without feeling like I owed anyone anything. I started looking for a place to rent, trying to figure out my next move. But then, just as I was starting to feel free, my phone rang. It was Susan. I let it go to voicemail. A few minutes later, another call. Then another. Then a text. James, please, I need to talk to you. It's important. I stared at the screen. Every instinct told me to ignore it. But some part of me, the part they trained me to obey, wouldn't let me. I called her back. The second she answered, she sounded like she was crying. James. Her voice was weak, almost feeble. Oh, honey, I didn't think you'd call back. Something felt wrong. Susan never cried. What do you want? I said, keeping my voice flat. She sniffled. It's your father. He's so stressed about everything right now, and I don't know how much longer my heart can take it. James, the first so scared. I blinked. Your heart? She sighed heavily, as if she could barely get the words out. Yes, the stress, the worry, it's too much for me. I'm not as young as I used to be. I'm afraid my old heart won't last. I rubbed my temple. Mom, you're 53. Silence. Then she sniffled again. That's still old. I almost laughed. She was trying so hard to manipulate me, but it was just bad. You were literally bragging about how much energy you have last week, I said. You told Linda you were feeling better than ever. More silence. Then, in a completely different tone, calm, normal, she said, James, honey, we need you. We made some mistakes, okay? But we're still a family. Families help each other. Ah, there it was, the shift from victim to guilt tripper in less than 10 seconds. I should have hung up. I knew I should have. But something inside me, the old me, hesitated. Maybe they had learned their lesson. Maybe leaving really had changed things. So, against my better judgment, I said, I'll think about it. And that was the biggest mistake I could have made. The second I said, I'll think about it, Susan pounced. Oh, James, this means so much to me. I knew you wouldn't turn your back on your family. Her voice was suddenly stronger, less fragile. Can we meet for lunch, just to talk? I hesitated. I should have said no. Every instinct told me it was a trap. But, against my better judgment, I said yes. The next afternoon, I met her at a small diner. She was already there, sitting in a booth, her hands clasped as if in prayer. The moment she saw me, her face lit up as if I had just walked on water. "Oh, my sweet boy," she gushed, reaching out to clasp my hands. "I miss you so much." I slid into the stall. "Mom, let's just cut to the chase," she sighed, looking down as if about to say something painful. "James, I want to apologize for everything." I blinked. This was unexpected. "We took advantage of you," she went on. "We didn't appreciate you, and we were wrong. When you left, your father and I realized how much you did for us." She sighed dramatically. "It's been so hard without you, darling. We're drowning." There it was, the hook. I crossed my arms. "You mean you actually have to pay your own bills now?" She gave a sad little nod. "Yes, and, James," the first so scared, she put a hand on her chest as if she was feeling for a heartbeat. "I haven't been able to sleep. My heart keeps racing. I think the stress is making me sick." I stared at her. "Mom, you literally went on a spa weekend 2 days ago." Her eyes widened for a split second. "Well, yeah. But that was just to try and relax from all the stress." I was desperate, James. I should have walked out. I should have laughed in her face and walked away. But she kept talking. "We've learned, sweetheart. We really have. And listen, I know we don't deserve it, but if you could just help us this one last time, I swear things will be different." She leaned forward and lowered her voice. "Your father, he won't say it, but he's scared too. We could lose the house, James." I felt my stomach twist. That house, I had spent my whole childhood there. The thought of them losing it felt wrong, even after everything. I sighed and rubbed my face. "Fine," I muttered. "I'll cover this month's mortgage." Her whole face lit up. "Oh, honey, I knew you had a good heart." That night, I logged into my bank account and made a one-time payment toward the mortgage. It was a mistake, a huge one, because the next morning I woke up to a text from Mark. "Damn. Thanks for paying the mortgage, bro. Can you cover my car payment too? I'm a little short." I stared at my phone, my blood boiling. Then another text came through from Robert. "Glad you came to your senses, son. Let's talk about next month's bills soon." I realized then that nothing had changed. They had just played me again. And I was done for real this time. Ethan found out about it 2 days later. I didn't tell him I wasn't going to, but he saw the bank transaction when I left my laptop open. He stared at the screen for a long moment, then turned to me. "You paid them?" I opened my mouth to explain, to say it was just one payment, that it wouldn't happen again. Crack his palm connected with the side of my face. So quickly, I barely processed it. My head snapped sideways, stinging my cheek. I blinked at him, stunned. "Did you just?" Ethan pointed his finger in my face. "You absolute idiot." I had never seen him so angry. "After everything they did to you, after they laughed at you, you just gave them exactly what they wanted?" I swallowed hard, still in shock. Ethan ran a hand through his hair and paced the room. "James, listen to me. I don't care what excuses they gave you. I don't care if Susan clung to Harold Hart, or if Robert pretended to be afraid. They are users, and you just let them win." I clenched my jaw. "I was just thinking." "No, no more thinking." He grabbed my phone from the table and shoved it into my hand. "Block them. All of them. Right now." I hesitated. He glared at me, his voice deadly serious. "If you don't, James, you'll never get out. You will be their ATM for the rest of your life." My hand shook, and then, for the first time, I blocked them: Susan, Robert, Mark, all of them. Ethan watched me do it, then exhaled and shook his head. "Jesus, man," he sat down beside me and rubbed his face. "I don't know how you turned out so damn nice with a family like that." I let out a weak laugh. Yeah, me either. It's been months now. I haven't spoken to them since that day, not even once. And you know what? They never even tried to reach me in any other way. No emails, no showing up at Ethan's. They didn't care about losing me, they only cared about losing their money. I should feel free. I should feel proud. And in a way I did. I stopped funding them. I also stopped funding Laura. She called once, complaining about some bills she was struggling with. And for the first time, I told her, no. She hung up without saying another word. But here's the truth. Deep down, I still feel like a loser. I still feel like the guy who never knew how to say no. I know I did the right thing. I know that my family was toxic. But after being the person who was needed for so long, it's weird not to be. I'll get over it, at least I hope I will. Update. It's been a few months now, and I finally have my own place. It's not fancy, just a small one-bedroom apartment, but it's mine. No one asking for money, no guilt trips, no walking on eggshells in my own home, just silence. At first, the silence felt strange. I was so used to people wanting something from me that I didn't know what to do with myself. But now I'm starting to enjoy it. The other day, I walked by my parents' house out of curiosity. It looked rough, unkempt yard, peeling paint. For the first time in my life, I felt nothing when I looked at it. No guilt, no urge to fix things. They made their choices and I made mine. And for once, I think I made the right one.